Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and on this video we're going to be taking a look at a special release that just hit shelves here in Ohio. This is the 2020 limited edition from Yellowstone. Alright, so this limited edition from Yellowstone is coming to us from the Limestone Branch Distillery, which is a very recently opened distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky. They were founded in 2010 and formally opened their doors in 2011, and since 2015 they've been putting out yearly limited edition bourbons, many of which have featured wine cask finishes and usually involve the blending of some older age-stated bourbons. Now, this bottle is a little bit on the younger side. This is a 7-year-old bourbon, clocking in at 101 proof. And before we go any further, we should note the price point here. We are in premium bourbon price territory. This is an MSRP of about $100, and here in Ohio, they raised the limited editions from Yellowstone from 100 last year to now 120. And it's state-controlled pricing, so usually pretty fair. But 120 bucks is a lot of money when we're talking about, any bourbon, really. So there's high expectations here going into it. Now, the reason that I purchased this bourbon in the first place is because of one word on the front label, and that is Armagnac. All right, so this has been finished in French Armagnac casks. And for those of you who are familiar with any other Armagnac finished bourbons, you know that typically they are complete flavor bombs. Usually lots of deep, dark, rich flavors, plum, fig, grape, a lot of those jammy characteristics, typically with a good dose of oak and leather as well. And usually the bourbons that we see being finished in Armagnac casks are older bourbons, between 11 to 13 years old or so. Many of them are MGP sourced, of course. But there is this expectation in the market now for what an Armagnac finished bourbon should be like. And I think it's a good expectation for that matter. Some of those bottles you might be familiar with would be this Joseph Magnus cigar blend. Just absolutely delicious here. This has a little bit more than Armagnac going on. It has sherry and cognac as well. And another bottle, my personal favorite in the Armagnac sort of family here, is Bardstown Bourbon Company's collaboration with Chateau de la Baude. And again, this is another high rye MGP mash bill being finished for 18 months in Armagnac casks, and it's one of my absolute favorite whiskeys on the market. So with that being said, the competition is a little bit fierce here, and I was hoping that this Yellowstone would be a slightly more available option in that Armagnac category than these other two. The Bardstown Bourbon Company collaboration is long gone off the shelves and now being sold for $425 on the secondary market. And the Joseph Magnus cigar blend comes out a few times a year, I believe. I'm not super familiar with their release schedule, but they drop a few batches at a time. And it's not terribly hard to find. It's, up around 250 to 280 on the secondary market. But if we could find a more affordable sort of option here in the Yellowstone and a more available one, because I've seen it all over the state at this point, then, it would be great to have that. So again, I went into this with high hopes and really looking for those Armagnac characteristics that I'm very familiar with from these two whiskeys back here. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and pour a glass of the Yellowstone, and we will nose and taste it and see what we get. Now, I just poured this glass. Give it a second here to open up. Another thing that I wanted to say before we get to the nosing and tasting is that I'm actually not super familiar with Yellowstone's products. I have never purchased one of their limited offerings yet. This is my first one, just because I've heard mixed reviews about it. And again, we're talking about premium price territory. But I did recently just pick up, you can tell I've only had one sip of this, Yellowstone Select, just to have a point of reference here. And so I will put these side by side. That's a good cork pop. It's actually probably good to just go ahead and pour this now, because I know I'm going to want to do this comparison here. put this up here. Okay, so let's get to it here with the Yellowstone limited edition first, 101 proof, 7 years, finished in Armagnac casks. Okay, so right away, the first thing that I'm getting here is sort of that youthful characteristic of dry oak, dry spicy oak, and some, peanut influence in there as well. It's not like peanut butter. It's really like that dry, brittle type peanut shell thing that you get in sort of a younger Beam or a younger Heaven Hill product. Now it's starting to open up a little bit more to like some caramels, and it's sort of lighter caramel. It's not deep and rich like an Elijah Craig barrel proof. It is a lighter, more spicy sort of cinnamon type caramel. Definitely some ethanol, actually. At this 101 proof, I wouldn't expect as much of that youthful green type ethanol, but it's there. It's there. And I guess I could see where the Armagnac comes in here, but it's not that deep, rich Armagnac. It feels like this has been aged in a cask that was like Armagnac rinsed, or maybe it held very young Armagnac when it was dumped. And of course, that would probably keep prices down. At this point, I'm just speculating, but the Armagnac influence here is more of like maybe apricot, peach, lighter fruits like that. I mean, if you really search for a grape note in there, I guess you could find it, but it's not apparent. And I mean, even if you just look at the color of this, the video might show it a little bit darker than I'm seeing it here. We're in a little bit of lower light, but the color is not that deep, dark, rich color that, like, if you look at this Chateau de Labade, it's wildly darker, And I know we're talking about 12-year-old MGP finished for 18 months, this being 7 years finished for, I don't know if they've disclosed how long this finish was in the Armagnac casks, but even by the color, you can see it's not going to have as much influence. And on the nose right now, I'm getting $25 to $30 bourbon nose. It's the notes that we're getting here are not at all in that $100 range, in my opinion. Let's go to the palate and see how that does. Okay. Yeah. Right away, just like on the nose, there's a pop of like oak spice. Again, that brittle nuttiness, that brittle spicy characteristic. It actually did develop nicely on that first sip into, again, maybe some of those like lighter stone fruits, the apricot peach type thing. It did go there, but now it's in the finish right now. It's very cinnamon, a little bit of prickly pepper, but I would say mostly cinnamon and mostly some of those baking spices. But let's get into it again and see what we get on a second sip. Okay. Yeah. And there's always this component of rye in there too. I'm not sure what the rye content is on this, but the rye is very apparent, whether it's as cinnamon. There's a little bit of that like youthful greenness to the rye as well. But yeah, a lot of cinnamon here, a lot of that oak spice, like I mentioned, and the caramels are getting deeper now, a little bit richer on that second sip as your palate acclimates to really an intense sort of front palate experience here. Now, one thing it's got going for it, it's a medium thin mouthfeel, which is not great, but because it's so punchy in your mouth, especially up front, it is mouth-watering, and it does linger well. And now, actually, on the finish here, I'm starting to get maybe some tobacco. Like there's some oak presence now in the finish that's making it feel slightly older than it is. Like the finish is now reminding me of a 10-year-old bourbon, probably maybe 12 years at most. But it's a lighter oak. It's not a heavy sour oak like a Knob 15-year store pick or like a Sam Houston 14. It's not in that realm of oakiness. but it is showing some oak on the finish. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of lingering cinnamon, some lingering fruitiness with some caramels, but at this point, I'm a little bit jaded by this whiskey. I don't really understand why this is a limited edition release. It reminds me of like a slightly fruitier Old Tub, if I'm being honest with you. So I don't know. We're gonna go in for one more sip here and see if anything changes. But at this point, this bottle is not looking good at the price point. Third sip, finish does okay. Along the way, the nose is not great. The palate's not great. To me, like I said, probably $25, $30 range, $35 at most I would pay for this bourbon. It is really nothing special, and I've been seeing a lot of posts in some of my local bourbon groups here in Ohio about this bottle, and every post I'm like, avoid this at all costs, please. It is not worth the money, and this is again proving it to me. You can see I have had a decent little bit of this bottle, probably, I don't know, a fifth of the bottle, and it hasn't developed very much. Maybe slightly more fruitiness, but, you know, really nothing special. So at this point, I want to go to the Yellowstone Select and see how these compare. So I'm not going to do a full review of the Yellowstone Select right now, but let me do a quick little comparison and see what we get. Yeah, Yellowstone Select is a lot lighter on the nose. It's almost got like a lemony characteristic, a citrusy characteristic here. Definitely a lot less caramel. And without that layer of caramel, without the layer of oak spice and baking spices, it's allowing lighter characteristics to come through, which is reminding me of this sort of lemon citrus type thing. Yeah, it's super plain and simple. Let's see what we get on the palate. That pop up front of the oak spice is now becoming more obvious here in the Yellowstone Select. It's not nearly as in your face as the limited offering here, but you can completely tell that these are related products. The finish it's already gone for me on the Yellowstone Select. It's probably been 7-8 seconds, totally gone. Mouthfeel is very, very thin. Definitely not my favorite bourbon, but an easy sipper, and it's not like astringent necessarily. It's not overly aggressive or ethanol forward. It's just, you know, it's just pretty normal. And next to the limited edition, yeah, it makes a limited edition feel dense and heavy and full, but when you just have it on its own, that's not the case. So if I was going to recommend you drink this in some way, put these things side by side, start with the Yellowstone Select, move to the limited edition, and then you might be a happy camper. For those of you who like that youthful kind of characteristic in your whiskeys of that spiciness, that peanut, and that sort of aggressive front of palate cinnamon, you know, you're going to like this Yellowstone, but I don't think you're going to want to pay $100 to $120 or $150 on secondary for it. So avoid this and go for some other lower level Knob Creek offerings, Old Tub, some things like that. But if you're going to spend $120, you know, this bottle is $120 off the shelf if you could have found it on the shelf. And, you know, it absolutely blows us out of the water. Final closing thoughts here. This is a do not recommend. It's a really bad value for money, unfortunately. And I know a lot of people don't like to give negative reviews, but I think this is important. And hopefully I'm going to be saving somebody some money here by passing on this bourbon and buying 2 or 3 other bottles for a total cost of $100, $120 and getting 3 times the value that you would get from this bourbon. And I know I'm being harsh, but the one redeeming quality of this bottle, besides the cool label, I really actually like the way all of this is designed. The bottle shape is new this year for the limited offering. It actually fares well as a musical instrument. You can actually pitch bend on this bottle, which is nice. And as a percussionist, I'm sure this will find its way into one of my crazy setups one day, however long it takes me to actually finish this bottle, which might be a while. Okay, So that's all for this episode of Drums and Drams. I've got some other things coming up. Glenmorangie Cake, I'm going to review that, which is a really, really cool offering and cool backstory from that Scottish distillery. And Glenmorangie is one of my favorite brands. If you haven't, go find me on Facebook, find me on Instagram, and please, consider subscribing to this YouTube channel if you enjoyed this video. Might have been a little long-winded here, but throwing a little shade, but I think that's okay in this case. So find me on social media. If you want me to review any whiskeys, just go ahead and drop me a comment, send me an email, and let me know what you'd like to see. And thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time on Drums and Drams. Cheers.